Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at Books and Books in Miami, Florida, I welcome you to a very special evening with award-winning author and end-of-life doula, Maryanne O'Hara, as she shares with us a mini webinar and workshop on how to conduct a life interview with your loved one or yourself, inspired by her new book, Little Matches, a memoir of grief and light, which is based on the blog she kept while her daughter Caitlin waited for a lung transplant. After her daughter's death, Maryanne trained as a certified end-of-life doula at the University of Vermont. End-of-life doulas provide support and comfort to clients and their families at the end of life, like a birth doula, only at the other end. Maryanne O'Hara is the author of the novel Cascade, which was the Boston Globe Book Club's inaugural pick, a finalist for the Massachusetts Book Award, and a People Book of the Week. She's also the author of a story collection, which was a finalist for the Flannery O'Connor Award for Short Fiction. She's the former associate fiction editor of the literary journal Plowshares and has taught creative writing at Emerson College and Clark University. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of Little Matches from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Maryanne to the virtual stage. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
So excited to hear you.
I'm really happy to be here. I love Books and Books. I wish I was there in person, but I'm really grateful that everyone's here tonight. Little Matches is a book that speaks to many topics, grief, obviously, but the subtitle is a memoir of grief and light is a big part of the book. It's basically a story about my search for light and meaning after a terrible, terrible loss. And it's about legacy. Legacy is something that's really important to me. So I put together this workshop and it has a lot of visuals in it. So I think visuals are a really great way to present something on this platform. So what I'm going to do is hide myself and share the screen. And then I'm going to present the Legacy Workshop, Little Matches, Light the Way. Okay, here we go. After I lost my daughter, Caitlin, I looked for revelation. I became every human who has ever looked for answers to the hard questions. Where is she? Is she? Is there more to life than this life? Does consciousness survive death? Does my existence serve any real purpose? Does anyone's? So I wrote Little Matches from inside real-time grief, and I asked those big life questions. Caitlin became a real sage for all of us. She had so much wisdom. And the last couple of years, while she was waiting for her lung transplant and she was on oxygen, it was easier to write than to speak. After her passing, many of her friends shared her writing with me, including text messages, conversations that would have been lost forever, were recorded. So all of her old soul wisdom is in the book in a really cool way. I know I'm not the first person to lose what's most important to me. Humans lose all the time, and lose hard. Little Matches is for anyone who loses and asks, now what? So there she is. I wrote little matches to share who Caitlin was, to share her wisdom, and to make a record of my search for answers to those big life questions. In my fiction, I'd always explored those themes, but in a ruminating sort of way. It wasn't until I was living inside catastrophic grief that answers became necessary. I realized I needed to write the personal. I needed to establish my daughter's legacy. Like so many people who live with serious illness, Caitlin was reflective. She gave a lot of thought to questions of meaning and purpose and legacy. What is legacy? The dictionary tells us that one definition is something transmitted from the past. We tend to think of legacy as something tangible, offered to the present and to the future. In many cases, it is wisdom handed down. Cystic fibrosis is the genetic lung disease that Caitlin was diagnosed with at age 2. CF people are prone to lung infections that destroy lung tissue, but it's usually a slow process, as it was with Caitlin. She was able to live a pretty normal existence, at least outwardly, for most of her life. I always appreciated that I was able to put CF in a box. If we weren't in crisis mode, I was very good at compartmentalizing. I had a saying, let's not ruin today worrying about tomorrow. And you know what? I'm really glad I had that optimistic mindset. It meant that we lived as happily as we could. It meant that Caitlin didn't define herself by her disease. And since severe decline is not inevitable, we were always able to live with hope for the future. But Caitlin did decline and began to struggle through her 20s. She went from being this fast little runner in elementary school to a recreational jogger in college to finally having to change her residence multiple times in her 20s until she ended up in a building with no steps, an elevator, indoor parking. Looking back, I compared our experience to the frog in the slowly boiling water. We humans can adapt to pretty much anything. In an email Caitlin wrote to a school friend she reconnected with later in life, she wrote about how tricky her 20s had been. It wasn't so bad that I couldn't fake it and kind of live normally, but I also couldn't strike out and do something bold. It really was this constant picking and choosing of battles, fun, etc. To the outside world, she looked completely healthy. CF, like the issues so many live with, is often invisible. We all live with an invisible something. When the time came that she needed oxygen 24/7, needed a lung transplant to survive, we entered into limbo, the limbo of waiting for transplant. For many reasons, we had to move from Boston to Pittsburgh for the surgery. We hoped it would happen within a few months. In fact, she waited for 2.5 years. As we waited, I laser focused on the positive, a successful outcome that would allow her to return to independent living. Here I am playing hospital hangman with her to help keep her spirits up. And here she is with her spirits up. Our positivity wasn't ignorance or wishful thinking. People do survive lung transplants and go on to live fulfilling lives. But part of me knew, of course it did, that I would probably outlive Caitlin. An organ transplant is risky business with no longevity guarantees at all. And besides, there are all the other everyday threats facing humans: routine accidents, acquired diseases, viruses, as we well know. I had seen one brother-in-law taken by a surprise brain aneurysm at age 29, and my father died of heart disease at 59. I knew that we are all temporary, that the arc of a human life, even a long one, is a blink in time. So why didn't I gather up more of Caitlin while I could? Why didn't I make more recordings of her voice? Why didn't I ask her every question I might ever want an answer to? One reason was because I wouldn't have wanted to upset her, especially during the wait for surgery. Why are you asking me this stuff? Do you think I'm not going to make it? But the real reason is the most basic human reason. We always think we have more time. We should know better. We know we will die, but of course we don't want to think about it. As I write in Little Matches, not long after losing Caitlin, a man who was only my husband's age put his arm around Nick and said, "Oh, pal, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine." That night, that man went to bed and never woke up. After she was gone, I wished I had so much more of her. For every snippet I had of her talking and being, I had 1,000 videos of this little guy, Henry, not doing much at all. But when I began to write Little Matches, I was fortunate in that she had written so much. I was able to gather her musings on life and meaning and purpose, writings that were scattered but existing in emails and texts she had written to me, to her dad, to friends. Her words inside Little Matches live on. Her words inspire others. A passage she wrote about courage has struck a chord with many people. When I feel myself flailing, grasping, panicking with pain or hurt, I get a notion in my head, always, and remember that there is courage. Courage is the answer, because courage doesn't negate the problem. It exists within the problem. And when you realize the answer lies in taking in the problem and living in spite of it, with full awareness of it, you feel a new option and a new sense of hope and life. I have to say that the feedback I'm receiving from readers is really, really heartening. It gives purpose to my days. Caitlin's legacy is comforting people and inspiring them. So I was able to cobble together, like so much of her writing, many of her belongings and photos, and weave all of her into Little Matches. Caitlin's legacy exists. And I would normally ask at this point, have you thought about yours? But of course you have, and that's why you're here, which is great. We all have stories. We all have wisdom to share. I set this workshop up to urge everyone to consider conducting a life interview with a loved one, and also to recommend that you do one for yourself too. It's a really great tool for reflecting on who you are, what you stand for, how you feel about your life, and what wisdom you might like to pass along. Let me repeat what I said a minute ago. We always think we have more time. Let me tell you a little story that illustrates that. I've always been a volunteer of one kind or another, and for a long time I've been hearing the call to hospice. So at the end of 2019, I trained as a certified end-of-life doula through a program at the University of Vermont. An end-of-life doula provides support and comfort to humans as they approach death, like a birth doula, only on the other side of the arc. My favorite part of the training was legacy work, helping people craft their life stories. I realized that I could have used the right words to conduct a legacy interview with Caitlin, even during the transplant wait. "Hey, bud," I might have said. "You know how much I love oral histories and how valuable they've been to me for book research. I might start a new volunteering project, helping people record their stories. You're one of the most interesting people I know. Will you help me practice?" She would have loved talking about herself. Don't we all? I would have her actual voice ruminating on what's meaningful. I would have all her ways of laughing, of speaking with passion and conviction. All of it would be recorded. I completed the certification in late 2019 with the intent to begin hospice training in early 2020. I also had it in the back of my mind to conduct a legacy interview with my mother in Maine. Here she is in her 1970s maxi skirt. She was a member of the Historical Society, and I believe the occasion was the celebration of America's bicentennial. She loved history and books and had the kind of memory I can only dream of having. She'd been a really great source of historic details for me when I wrote Cascade, which is a novel of the past. So I really looked forward to recording an interview with her, then transcribing it and maybe giving it to members of my family for Christmas 2021 or 2020. I've learned from immersing myself in long pages of text messages I had with Caitlin, this is just here to make a point, you'll wreck your eyes if you try to read it, that there is something precious and really, really immediate about reading transcribed conversations, even completely mundane ones like this one. With a life interview, my mother's stories truly would be able to live on for her descendants. I had time. She was 83, but chugging along, living at my sister's, with no overt threats to her health. But in January, my sister wrote to say that Mom was deteriorating. She might have had a mild stroke. They weren't sure. There was an MRI scheduled. But regardless, she was failing by the day, and it was clear she was going to need to go into a care center. In the meantime, Kate had to go out of town for a week and needed me to come up and help. Those days and nights involved a numbing routine and a lot of physical effort. Mom could barely move on her walker. She needed help getting off the toilet, out of her chair, all of it. What you're seeing here is a still image from the webcam we installed in her living room for safety. One night she fell badly, and we were both hurt. Her from the fall, me from deadlifting her up off the floor. My last night there, before my sister came home, it occurred to me that I should do the legacy interview. But it had been a really long day. I wanted to go upstairs and have dinner and a glass of wine. I told myself that once she was in the care center, the life interview would be the perfect activity for a visit. We didn't know that it wasn't a mild stroke she'd had, but cancer, and that it was in her brain. And we didn't know that once she was in the care center, COVID would almost immediately close it down to visitors. I sent her a pretty notebook with a pen and a list of questions. But when we Zoomed and I asked her if she'd been able to do any of it, she just shook her head. For weeks, we visited outside, waving through windows and watching while a priest administered last rites. A few of us were allowed in at the end, but by then she was transitioning. She couldn't communicate. And again, as with Caitlin, I berated myself as I picked through scraps of memory and old messages to write an obituary. We always think we have more time. So we are going to make time right now. A life story project can take any form, go in any direction. Letters, time capsule, scrapbooks, videos, anything. But here, as a start, I'm going to lead you through a small project, a voice recording that you will transcribe and print. Transcription is really important, as anyone who recognizes these treasures can attest to. Audio video is precious, of course, but the formats to access it changes all the time. I honestly cringe to know that people are entrusting their precious memories to the ether, to the cloud. Technologies change all the time, but so far, we still have paper and words and pens. With a transcription, you'll have something tangible that can be held, saved, and passed down through generations. First of all, I'd like to point out the difference, as I see it, between oral histories and legacy/life stories. Oral historians have long gone around collecting people's stories in as much detail as possible so as to preserve a record of time and place. The recordings are usually hours long and full of detail. When I was writing my novel of the 1930s, I relied heavily on these histories. This is what one looks like, although this is one I actually made up for the new novel I'm writing. A life story, a legacy story, is more shaped and nuanced. A life story is a story, it's narrative. We hear facts about a person's situation and it can be hard to truly empathize. But we learn their details, we learn their story, and we cry. This one really made me cry. Very recent. An oral history might tell you that milkmen used to deliver milk in quart-sized glass bottles and set them on people's back steps 3 mornings a week. A legacy story will tell you how a particular kind milkman delivered free milk every Monday to someone's struggling, widowed mother in 1952, teaching a young kid a lifelong lesson about generosity. So let's go back to that word legacy, that idea of passing on your learned wisdom. Let's think about rituals and how humans create and enact rituals as a way to connect to each other and to the past. I love how this UVA professor describes rituals. Rituals connect us to groups. They connect us to the divine. They suggest a deeper world of meaning beyond the mundane habits of the everyday. They can transcend time, connecting us to our ancestors and to those who will come after us. There is some evidence that taking part in rituals may release endorphins, which act on the opiate receptors in our brains, which can ease pain and anxiety and produce pleasure. So we're going to make the life interview process a ritual of sorts, something meaningful and pleasant. We're going to slow down right now, shake ourselves into the present. A teacher I had when I was a kid used a bell to help us focus. So I'm going to ring my beautiful Balinese bell and just take a moment, breathe a little bit, just sink into the moment. Breathe in, let it out. Touch something nearby. Notice the texture. I've got a stone from Italy here that sits on my desk. It's beautiful and smooth. Okay, we are in the moment. This is where we want to be when we conduct our life interviews, which means we want to plan them, make time for them, make them special. Here are some good tips. If you're not interviewing yourself, approach your subject. Explain that a life interview is a wonderful way to reflect on life, process important transformational events, reflect on meaning, and pass on learned wisdom. Now, with the elderly or sick, the idea of doing a life review can be alarming. So it's wise to figure out the best way to broach the idea, depending on the individual. You have to know your subject here. With my mother, I knew that I would have had to bring up the idea in the right way once it was clear to us that her life was coming to an end. With her, because she was a big storyteller anyway with that great memory, I might have said, "We've always loved your stories. I'd like to start a family history project. Can I start with you?" I also might have bitten the bullet, so to speak. Hospice nurses tell story after story of patients who don't talk about their imminent death because they think their loved ones can't handle it, when in fact they'd really like to. It can be a tricky place to navigate, but approaching from an almost neutral, calm place of openness and love and support is a good start. But not everyone will be open to the idea, so don't record secretly. If someone doesn't want to be recorded, that's certainly their right. Offer to conduct the interview wherever the subject feels most at ease, but the spot should be private and quiet, welcoming, comforting. Have tea or water available. Establish a time limit. I'm suggesting 30 minutes. 30 minutes is easy to schedule. It's a manageable amount of time for someone to spend talking, especially if they're ill or elderly. And 30 minutes is easy to transcribe. Have your questions ready. I will be providing you with sample questions, which you can either use verbatim or as a point of departure, whatever you like. Know your recording app and practice with it so there won't be any glitches. I just use the voice recording app on my iPhone, but there are plenty of apps available, and of course there are traditional standalone recorders. So then you want to conduct the live interview. Get comfortable. Ready the recording app and place it between you where it can pick up the sound of both voices. Briefly explain that you will be asking questions, but they are not set in stone, that if your subject doesn't want to answer any particular question, it's absolutely fine. When you ask your questions, take care to maintain eye contact and refrain from responses other than like, right, okays. Keep in mind that it's an interview, not a conversation. Be conscious of framing questions so they are open-ended and don't reflect your own opinions. Avoid leading questions such as, was it terrible when your father left the family? Instead, you might ask, how did you feel when your father left the family? Follow-up questions can be helpful, such as, can you give me an example of that? Okay, I'm going to read the questions/prompts, and the list will be available afterward. But for now, maybe just close your eyes and reflect on them, or jot down notes if something comes to you. I obviously can't leave the normal amount of time here for answering. So I'm also going to show myself now, even though I can't see myself. Hi. My first 3 prompts are not really for verbally answering. They are just to start the process. They are for reflection. Who are you? What is your identity? What else are you? Okay, let's start. When you were a child, what did you enjoy most about life? What have you liked best about your adult life so far? Recall a challenging time in your life. What was it like? What did you learn from that time? If you had the power to solve one and only one problem in the world, what would it be? Where are you most comfortable and content? What is the texture of that place? The details. If you were very ill or nearing end of life, what would be the best way a loved one could support you? Think of an ancestor you know of but never met. If you could communicate with that person, what would you say? Think of a descendant you will never know. If you could communicate with that person, what would you say? What have been the most influential experiences in your life? What, if anything, would you have done differently in your life? What do you know now that you wish you'd known when you were younger? Over time, have you changed the way you look at life, at people? Do you have a philosophy of life? What's your best piece of advice for living? Fill in the blank. I'm looking forward to. What do you see as your purpose in life? Okay, last one. First, ponder these 3 words: your resume, your life, your eulogy. Okay, what would you like your loved ones to remember about you? Okay, so once you have your recording, promise yourself you'll transcribe it immediately. Immediately. You can do it yourself. A half hour isn't that hard. It's a little bit tedious. Or you can use one of many transcription services that will do it for a small fee. I've used this one before, but there are plenty of them. You can just do a quick search online. When I sent my first legacy subject her transcript, I asked for her feedback. This was a vibrant woman in midlife, no health issues. I like that the Legacy Project gives you a chance to think about legacy and life philosophy and not just end-of-life issues. I was pleasantly surprised to see that I have a pretty coherent life philosophy. When Caitlin turned 21, I made good on a vow I'd made when she was diagnosed at age 2 to do a meaningful, time-heavy volunteer stint if she lived to be 21. I became a mentor to a high school student, which came with a firm commitment to spend time with her every week of high school until graduation. This is Amy back in the day with Henry. She was a delight, and she's a remarkable young adult now. She and her sister review books on Instagram, and the very day I was working on this workshop 2 weeks ago, I saw that Amy had posted this, and I asked her if I could use it. I loved how she mused about the timelessness of words in her post. People live on forever through stories. So once you've transcribed it, print it. You can make it pretty, keep it plain, but print it and share it. Again, all of this is flexible and easy to personalize. I'd also like to just give a little PSA of sorts. If you were to die and you would want a loved one to be able to open your phone, your computer, etc., share your passwords or put them in your will or somewhere safe where people can find them. Fortunately, just before Caitlin became unconscious, she gave me her passwords. But since her passing, I have heard of so many people who have no access, and it really adds to the grieving process. So just something to think about. Recently, my brother Michael found a video snippet of Caitlin. I didn't even know it existed. I did transcribe the words, but it's really precious. And here's a little snippet of it that I'm going to end with, and then I'll take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
It's a great first signing. I'm so proud of my mother that when I walked out a bunch of grapes and the harp player was playing, I teared up. And I was glad I had my glasses on.
Thank you. Thanks. Now I can see myself.
Wow.
Hi.
That was profound.
Thank you. I hope.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. I was taking notes like mad.
Oh, well, you can watch it again, and I will send everyone, if you want the prompts that I had given.
If you could, yes, because
yeah.
that way I can send them to everyone by email.
For sure.
When we're done. So we have one question here so
Okay.
far, but I want to remind everyone watching, now is the time to go ahead and post whatever you'd like to ask Maryanne here in the Ask a Question button. So here from Sarita. I just left my sister's neuro-oncology appointment, and the doctor told us to prepare for her end of life. She has glioblastoma, sorry. I can't stop the next stage, but I can incorporate my Reiki practice to make her departure more comfortable. Can you recommend the best practice to make it a more supportive and healing transition? Thank you, from New York City.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. And I'm so sorry. And it sounds like your sister's in good hands with you. I will say that when I signed up, when I decided to do hospice and signed up for the doula program, I really considered myself to be an expert in grief. And it was really humbling to take the course and realize that the only grief I was expert in was my own. And one of the best things the course sort of really drilled into us was to hold space. That's what they call it, holding space for people and coming to them where they are. So almost letting them lead the way and offering support in not leading so much. So without knowing anything about your sister, you're the best person to know how to be with her. And it sounds like if you're a Reiki practitioner, you've probably got a good mentality and some good experience dealing with people who are sick. I used to do Reiki at Boston Brigham and Women's Hospital, and I mainly worked with the people who are dying. And what I had said earlier too about being calm and neutral, being open.
Thank you. So Bella Blanca would like to know the question, where are you most comfortable? Was there more to it? Thank you. I admire you so much.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. No, they were questions I thought of. Some of these actually are a shout out to my course. I thought I had that in there, but I guess I didn't. And some of them I made up. In the novel that I haven't finished, my main character is a quirky person who runs a legacy library in Washington, D.C. And so I had sort of sat down one day a few years back when Caitlin was waiting for transplant, and I was writing this book, and I thought to myself, what questions would I really want to be asked if I needed to really get in touch with myself, or if I really needed to decide, am I on the right path? Where do I want to be? And where you find yourself most comfortable, I think is just very telling. And I have realized, especially as I've gotten older and I've lost Caitlin, that I'm really thinking hard about those things now. I don't really want to do things I don't have to do unless I have to. And I've realized that I have a focus word for every day that I aim for, and it's tranquility. So yeah, it was just something I made up, but I think that really thinking about what you love will help you live the life you want.
Thank you. So from Katie, Maryanne and Books and Books, thank you so much. I have a 95-year-old grandpa and World War II veteran, and he's just becoming open about sharing his experience. We don't have a close relationship, but I feel that this legacy work is important to do. My grandpa doesn't like talking about his emotions, but I want to invite the connection. Any recommendations to invite the space for this interview?
Well, if he is open to doing the interview, I think setting it up, setting the rules, I have found that people like that, like guidelines, instead of sit down, Grandpa, and tell me, about how hard it was. Again, no leading questions. And just, again, as with anybody, this is their sacred, private, personal space. Tread carefully. And I think if you have good guidelines, Grandpa, we're going to do this for half an hour. I've got some questions. If you don't want to answer them, you don't have to. They're not prying questions. They're just to get you remembering the things that you are most proud of. They don't have to be the bad memories. They can be the good memories too. I think a lot of times people think of people who've been through war, and of course there's so much trauma, but there's also camaraderie and a lot of good things that people remember about the bad times. That's one thing I can definitely attest to, that as bad as times were, often when we lived through them, there were always good times too. And that's why the book is Grief and Light. Grief seeks light. Everything seeks balance in our human world. And I think with your grandfather, focusing on what was happy in his life might be the best start. That's how I might approach it.
Thank you. From Joshua, I was curious as to what your writing process is like. Did you write little portions every day, go on and off? Do you have any advice for someone who is starting out in writing?
Oh my goodness. Yes, write. Definitely write every day if you can, because it is a muscle and it is practice. And I must say that when Caitlin was waiting for transplant, at one point we had been waiting. She had been really sick, needing a lot of care she'd been really sick since Christmas. And by July of that year, she was on the transplant list. We were waiting. I had started this other novel after I had finished Cascade. And I realized it was July. And if I didn't start writing every day, the book was never going to get written. Like years could have gone by already. Months had gone by. So I started setting a timer every day and writing for 30 minutes. And it's really amazing what you can do in 30 focused minutes. And I circled the date in red on the calendar every day. I didn't miss a day until we were in the ICU 2 years and many months later, when one day I just looked up from my computer and I was like, what am I doing? I need to stop. But I did do it every day. And my goal had been to have a readable draft done by the end of that year. And I was very close. I mean, it was almost a readable draft. So, I think it was Mark Twain who said, the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. It means everything. And the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. And as far as writing little matches, I wrote it in the same way, because in the beginning it was so traumatic. I just knew I had to do it, but I had to go back to my little timer and set the timer. And every Monday I sent my pages to a writer friend who promised to keep me honest and expect them. And she did.
Wow, great advice. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is from Anonymous. Your inside book cover features the stunning collage of photos, images, etc. related to Caitlin. How can we incorporate questions in our legacy interview to become more aware of these precious items, or work with others to gather these? That's a great question.
That's a really great question. And I have to tell you that the impetus for this other novel that I was writing was from a little tiny museum that I went to. where they had a wonderful exhibit, and it was all things that people had saved, their objects. And you either had, oftentimes you didn't know the story, you just had to sort of imagine the story. And I just thought that was wonderful. So I think that, you know, you could definitely have a wonderful question where you ask somebody. I've done it myself. You know, I'm looking around my house and thinking, what if I move, you know, in the next 5 years? I've lived here since I was 25 years old. What would I take? I couldn't take it all. So you start to think, what's most important to you and why? So I think that's a really great question. And a lot of times people don't think to really say, you know, I know so-and-so would, you know, like my Balinese bell or something. So I think that's a really good question. I like that.
Here's a question from Caroline. Thanks so much for doing this. How would you recommend approaching a life story with a younger loved one, adolescent or teenager? Any other questions you might add with someone of that age?
Oh, yes. I really hope to give this workshop with younger people because I love younger people. And I think this is a great thing to think about. That's why I said it doesn't matter what age you are, what your health situation is. It's a great way to really think about your life and ask questions you may never have asked yourself. Who am I? What do I really want in life? Am I on the right path or am I on somebody else's path? So for sure, you know, I haven't thought of all the questions I would ask younger audience, but a lot of them are in that list that I just read because those questions can apply to anybody, for sure.
That's great. Aside from your own book, Little Matches, are there any reading recommendations or resources that you would recommend to us?
Well, in the back of Little Matches, there's
like a lot. Okay.
Pages of lists of books that I refer to. You know, in this book, I go through asking questions. I look for answers to why are we here? You know, does consciousness survive death? There are no answers. Consciousness is something that the science world calls the hard problem. And I went in with an open mind and I came out the other side with some ideas, and the book recounts all that. And I do have a pretty good list in the back of the book, all kinds of books, all kinds of resources.
Have you done an interview with yourself? And
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, I can tell you that I have. And writing this book, I mean, losing Caitlin, you know, I went through, especially, you know, she was diagnosed when I was 26 years old. And so I basically grew up with a very sick child, but who also could live a normal life most of the time. And I got to be 30 and I was like, what am I doing with my life? I'm not writing all that stuff I wanted to write. And I went to grad school. So I felt like I was just sort of on autopilot a lot. I'm a writer, I'm writing, I'm taking care of Caitlin. A lot of times we would have to just stop everything and go into the hospital for 2 weeks. And that was what life was like, cancel everything. But on the other hand, we had a wonderful life at the same time. But after losing her, nothing seemed to matter. And then I thought, well, I'm getting a lot of feedback from my blog. People really are responding to the posts that I write. If I can write a book and it's going to help people, then I want to do it. And then when it was coming out a couple of months ago, that's when I actually really started asking myself the questions, because I thought, what do I want? Like, I'm already set up, actually, and I'm just going to make a plug for these other books. 2 other books. Mallory Smith, Salt in My Soul and Unfinished Life. She was almost an identical story to Caitlin, brilliant young woman from California. And I write about this guy in, I was at a writer's conference writing Little Matches. I had 25 pages written. It was in a little 10-person workshop in Positano. And who else was there but this guy who had been the head of the lung transplant program at Stanford and was writing a memoir about his conflicted relationship with transplant.
Wow.
So his book just came out, and the three of us, patient, parent, because Mallory's, it's her posthumous memoir. Salt in My Soul is Mallory's posthumous memoir. Patient, parent, provider, three perspectives, one purpose, why medicine needs memoir, why medicine needs stories to really drive home the point that a lot of medicine, especially communication between patient and doctor, needs to change or needs to be better, needs to be improved. So yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
That's great. That's great. We welcome tangents.
I
Please
like
go
tangents.
off on tangents. We love tangents. And we love book recommendations.
Yes, exactly. Salt in My Soul is lovely, and Exhale is great. I mean, to really get the it's a very honest point of view from the doctor. Very honest.
Have you read Being Mortal?
Oh
by
yeah,
Atul Gawande?
I've read it. I've read it carefully twice. The last time I read it and took great notes. He's brilliant.
He really is.
Yeah, I've pretty much read all his
There's
stuff.
also a wonderful book called The Unwinding of the Miracle, a posthumous memoir as well that is wonderful. Anyway, so
so many books.
There's so many books, right? So many great books. We have a book club that meets at Books and Books called Breakfast with Hope. And we actually talk about these issues in that club. So, but this, I would love to invite you to be a guest maybe, to come back and talk to that group, because I think they would get so much from this.
I would love that. And I also love when people have already read the book and then, you know, this whole framework of legacy can be discussed and I can answer questions, and it's just fun.
I have to share with you that my mother, my 87-year-old mother, read the galley of your book and loved it and talked to me a lot about it. And actually, it opened up an opportunity to talk to her. So yeah, it was great. So that's just a personal, how your book, you know, touched my life.
I love that. Somebody told me that she and her mother, who were estranged, were both, one was reading my book and one was listening to it. And I do do the audiobook, and it brought them together.
This makes me want to stop everything and like go out and interview everyone in my life, in my family, and keep those transcriptions. So thank you so much. If there are any other questions, now is a good time to ask them. Do you have you come to settle on any religious, or maybe not religious, spiritual beliefs? And could you share those with us?
Sure. I always felt that religion didn't quite get it right. All the specific religions, they all obviously have so much that's good about them and some things that are not. But it never felt right to me. My parents were Catholic. It just didn't agree with me when I was a child. So when Caitlin was little, I wanted to introduce her to something. And I brought her to a multi-denominational church that was pretty, you know, low key. And then the pastor was arrested for rape. And I was like, I'm done with this. And at that point, Caitlin said to me, she was like 8. She's like, Mom, I really want to be Jewish. And I was like, all right, we will, we're just going to sort of like read about everything and explore everything ourselves. And that's kind of what we did. And I must say that there was a time when I was in my early 20s when I thought there's nothing else. So I went from being atheist to agnostic to now I do believe that there's something more. Something.
Thank you. So we have one more question. If a mother is hesitant to read your book because it's too sad, what could one say to make her feel better about the beauty and depth it offers? I'm trying to bond with my mom, but she's a tough cookie.
There are a lot of tough cookies out there. Well, I actually just sent out a mailing today because I'm having this issue for example, I'm getting these letters, like one I put in my little mailing today saying, "Your amazing book. Okay, I bought your book from my local independent bookstore and it sat on my desk and I walked by it for weeks, afraid to read it. And finally I started and I can't put it down. It's not what I expected. It's so inspiring. It's beautiful. It's comforting. It's all of this." I didn't write it to share misery at all. I wrote it to share the looking for light, the looking for the meaning in life, the good in life. Caitlin totally believed in goodness, not in a pious way. And I asked my publisher I said, the cover needs to glow. It needs to reflect light. And it does. I really am proud of the book. I feel like Caitlin was right alongside helping me write it. I really do. It's infused with light and comfort. And the fact that I'm getting such wonderful messages from people saying that I'm one woman quit her job, her dead end job. And I was like, great, that's what I want, for people to really think about life and meaning and what's really important at the end of the day, as Atul Gawande says, what really matters at the end of it all.
Well, I thank you so much for sharing yourself, for sharing Caitlin's story.
Thank you.
For bringing us closer to Caitlin. I think she would love this.
She would.
And I just want to thank you for being with Books and Books, for supporting us, for talking to all of us tonight. I want to remind viewers watching from everywhere that if you don't already have your copy, just hit that green button and you will get one very soon.
That green button. And thank you for supporting independent bookstores, especially this wonderful one. The first Books and Books I ever went into was in Coral Gables, and I walked in, I said, what is this wonderful place? So beautiful.
Well, you have to come back.
I will, for sure.
We want to see you back soon.
Post-COVID.
Hopefully.
Paperback.
Maybe, when does the paperback come out?
I mean, the book just came out.
It just came out, that's right.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. Okay, so maybe you'll join us at Miami Book Fair in November.
Maybe. Yeah, the book fairs are still getting sorted out, aren't they?
We're hoping it's going to be in person and like a hybrid. In person, some events virtual, some events in person. So whatever you're comfortable with.
Oh, I'm vaccinated and raring to go, because I can tell you, not being able to see anybody out there is.
I know, it's so hard, right?
I really love talking to audiences, and it's hard not to see people. So,
well, we want to see
you. Thank you very much.
We'll all come when you come.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Anyway, again, thank you so much for everything, and
thank you.
Good night, Maryanne.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.